The early 2000s were a very interesting time. It was kind of like a renaissance of ideas and experimentation. It was the dawn of a new millennium and technology was improving. New horizons were forming both in terms of how we communicated, but also how we visualized our stories. However, the one medium that benefited the most from the innovation that came from the early 2000s was gaming. With how abundant the competition was between studios, there's such a vast quantity of fun shooter games, amazing horror games, and exceptional RPGs that came out during this era. All because the people responsible for making the games cared about the thing they were making. It really is incredible, just the amount of games we saw during that time that either became staples or ended up inspiring the creations of games like them. That being said, arguably the most overlooked genre in the early 2000s has to be racing games. There's something so magnificent about the racing games that came out during this era. It's not just nostalgia that makes these games great. The techniques that were developed and used to create their graphics ultimately produced this stunning atmosphere. You couldn't find it elsewhere. A sensation that, when played, immersed you like no other. That's not all though, because this era of racing games was also defined by the profusion of different ideas and settings. You had games like Gran Turismo and Juice that brought you into this present, but then you also had games like Extreme G Racing and Wipeout Fusion that took you into the future. These games weren't just racing games, but excuses to make some of the coolest, most aesthetically pleasing environments known to gaming. Like, here, let's pull an example from the realistic racing category. Need for Speed Underground had you driving in the present at the dead of night. Everything around you was pure atmospheric bliss. The world lit up with the lights of buildings and lampposts. The roads were coated in this glossy sheen. It genuinely immersed you in this feeling of being a part of an underground scene. Now let's take a game in the futuristic setting. G-Surfers pulls you into this future setting almost immediately. The environments are no longer just city streets, but instead vertically insane. You're traveling up these mountains going Mach 10. Your car has been replaced by this insane-looking flying hovercraft. While the graphics aren't as good as Need for Speed, the environments still hold this value to them. Whether the game was realistic or futuristic, it didn't matter. The art direction of every single game that came out during this time was simply extraordinary. They all try to do something new and establish an identity for themselves. When you compare what we saw from the early 2000s to now though, you notice something unfortunate. Many of the techniques and styles that were so apparent in these games vanished. There are not as many options as there used to be, both in presentation and setting. The components utilized to make these games I just spoke about were abandoned. That isn't to say all of the racing games that come out nowadays are lacking in style, because, trust me, there are still diamonds in the rough. Games such as Turbo Blast Racing and Ballistic NG absolutely deliver on being visual beauties and inspire a lot of hope towards the genre. The problem, however, is that these games are few and far between. You have to dig deep through a lot of ultra-realistic racing games to find the ones with even a modicum of style. The even harsher truth as well is that these games don't have the level of notoriety that games like Forza have, as much as I wish they did. Instead of continuing to indulge ourselves in the sad state of modern racing games though, I want to pull the focus back to the early 2000s. Showcase what was left behind and abandoned. So, put a helmet on, racer, as we remember the lost art of early 2000s racing games.
Music Player on Ridge City FM.
The one I'd like to start with is Ridge Racer, the 5th edition, more specifically. Now, Ridge Racer isn't a series I grew up with myself. In fact, the most I knew about the series up to this point was hearing mentions of it in songs. However, the reason I decided to dedicate a portion to it is because of how appealing it is in a visual context. I know that sounds kind of silly considering this video is all about the style of old racing games, but something about this specific game is so extravagant. Let's just start with the UI. The biggest thing in any game is the interface, and in modern racing games, it's likely the most neglected and uninspired aspect. These UIs are meant to convey the same feeling you have when you hop into an arcade. They're meant to be bombastic. Ridge Racer captures this exact feeling of arcadiness that you'd want out of a racing game. The color variety hones in on that motorsport feeling. I liken the color palette of the UI to the flags used in motorsport races. Both red and yellow just integrate the idea of racing into the back of your head in such an effective, strange way. Additionally, the speedometer being so large serves as a visual representation of the game. What does it take to get your car to the finish line? Speed. And what's more important than telling the player that they're driving exceptionally fast? It makes you feel like you're pushing the limits of your vehicle. It should be the priority in the HUD. It makes the car you're driving feel like a powerhouse. Things like the typography and the track outline reinforce the motorsport feel as well. The way the text has this sleek, geometric design really attaches itself to the appearances of the cars in an underlying way. There's much more to talk about though, so moving on from the UI, let's talk pure game visuals. What really makes this game distinct in the visual department is just how well it tapped into the warmer color hue. The cars and the landscapes are just so warm looking. There's not as much saturation compared to the other games I'd spoken about in this intro, but every landscape in the game just radiates this very amber looking tone. I hate to call things nostalgic simply because of their art style, but there is no other way of describing it. There's a magic to it. If you've ever taken a drive through a relatively sprawling urban area and it's just before the sun begins to set, you'll understand where I'm coming from. It's that sight you see for a moment just before the sun goes down. It's kind of ethereal. The courses at night, however, are just as good. Many of these tracks look best at night. It's mainly a combination of two things, the reflection and the streetlights. This is the reason behind this entire video, and I'm being dead serious. It feeds a point that I've had for a very long time, and that is, restriction is creativity. What truly makes these visuals so remarkable to me is the fact that the actual reflections on the car weren't simulated. They were designed. The game came out a year before ambient occlusion was available. The technique required to pull off the look of a reflection quite literally had to come from the ingenuity of the devs. It's for this exact reason that they carry with them such a mesmerizing essence. To draw another comparison, think of a painting compared to real life. Obviously, real life is the more beautiful canvas, since, well, it's real, but the painting is more captivating because we subconsciously register the craft it took to conjure that world in paint. The same goes for modern gaming reflections. They are beautiful, but these are significantly more special simply because of what was involved with creating the effect. The last visual aspect I'd like to touch on is the car selection menu. It seems like a silly thing to be interested in, but you know what? I'm a silly person. There's something so charming about the way the selection menu replicates this almost infinite garage. Each car has a cinematic that can be played in the menu as well, and it just adds so much presentation to both the car and the menu. It's such a minute thing to include in a select screen, but it's so excellent at emanating this feeling of perusing your very own lavish collection of cars. This game is absolutely beautiful, but I'm going to shift gears for a moment and talk about the music because, like the reflections, it's a large reason as to why I decided to make this video. There is just an atmosphere present in this music. It harbors this dreamlike techno sensation, which just makes it so smooth to listen to. It's that combination of synth and drum and bass that was really only utilized in this era. Junks and Euphoria are easily the best tracks in the game. They both just have such an arcadey, optimistic rhythm to them. We're going to have to park the discussion here though, as we've got to turn to the next game.
Auto Modellista!
Auto Modellista. I realize this may be a strange inclusion for the fact that it's not necessarily realistic in a graphical sense, but the game is realistic in a realistic sense. That being said, if there's one thing I love most about the 2000s, it's cell shading. Cell shading is such a timeless style that a game like Jet Set Radio can still hold up to today's standards. I think what really made the cell shading in this era so much more enticing though is purely due to the fact that there was just significantly more punchiness to it. It was exceptionally simple in visual design, and that's noticeable in this game. The cars and the environments just pop out so much more as a result of the cell shading. The lack of proper lighting and reflections makes them feel like 3D cartoons. There's something so beautiful about the way the world just blends. As I said before, it really is just timeless. The lack of resolution in the images is the only thing on the screen that feels dated. However, the one major thing this game absolutely nails is the color. Whereas Ridge Racer wasn't heavily saturated, this game is packed with color. Pure vibrancy in every detail. One of the city courses just has this atmospheric mix of orange and black. In all honesty, as much as I love the Ridge Racer nighttime scenery, this game surpasses it with just one track. Additionally, the glow of the buildings and the rain effect adds so much life to this course. Even though this game is very fast and doesn't allow for a whole lot of time to process what you're seeing, a glance will absolutely enthrall you. There's also another nighttime course I really admire, and while it doesn't have nearly the same level of depth, it's still beautiful. Just driving through the downtown area and seeing the variety of colors take up your screen just inspires so much excitement. The daytime courses harbor this sprawling color palette as well. I wouldn't normally say that daytime courses offer much in terms of memorable visuals, but Auto Modellista's day courses are pure gorgeousness. They look so clean and so vital. There's some attachment to the Fruitager Aero aesthetic with this aqua blue sky and turquoise green grass. Even though the meshes and textures are very simple, the color fabricates the depth in the world. There are also sunset courses. They're so dreamlike in appearance, and they fuse the pink skies with the orange tinted trees surrounding you. I want to put the visuals in the backseat though, because the sound is really what makes this game so good. The music style in this game is a fusion of jazz and techno. The combination of synth and piano is nothing short of ecstatic. It's something that can be heard in other early 2000s racing games, like the one that we already mentioned. I liken a lot of the tracks to Kota Takahashi's work. There's just this intelligent, methodical sound to the songs. It's as intense as it is relaxing in a way. Additionally, there are elements of drum and bass mixed into the songs, which was a staple for a lot of early 2000s games in general. It conveys such a significant portion of the track's speed, which, given the gameplay, makes sense. However, it also adds a layer of futurism to the sound. It tacks onto the rhythm and implies this industrial feeling. Overall, while I think these two games aren't super unique in their gameplay, there's a lot of style in them. Even though they're meant to be realistic looking games, how they manage to break away from the mold sets them apart from the others. However, now that we've talked about the realistic games, it's time to move to the future. Now, how do you start the futuristic setting? I'll tell you how. Speed Racer, baby. I was obsessed with this franchise as a kid, and I'm sure that to any newcomers, this probably looks like nothing but visual noise. However, this game rules. There's just so much to enjoy about this game. This is likely one of the most whimsical and eccentric racing games ever made. I'll start with the courses, because they're the main piece that catches you in the gameplay. The tracks and environments in this game are so fantastical. There's so much charm in the courses. You unfortunately don't get much time to focus on them since you're moving so fast, but the grandeur of the tracks is amazing. The best word to describe them is scale. There's just so much personality and life in these tracks, and they do so much to captivate you with their environments. One of my favorite tracks is Anuris, and the reason why I love this one so much is because of the combination of themes. It's uniting this futuristic setting with this Egyptian landscape and casino strip aesthetic. There are so many different elements to its design. It makes the environment feel flashy and grandiose. And again, the sense of scale in this course is significant. It does such a phenomenal job at interweaving you into this idea of being a part of a large, spectacular event. The use of color is also brilliant in this track. There's so much use of just warm colors. There's this golden orange sun just beaming towards you, and the sky above you is this blend of orange and blue. It makes you feel like you're driving through this glowing desert horizon as the day turns to night. All the while, you're coming close to killing people. My absolute favorite track, though, is Aurora. The design of this track on a conceptual level is incredible. The first part of the track has you start off in this dome, and you just see this conical city surrounding you. As you drive through the course though, the track opens up and reveals this freezing Arctic. It is so magnificent looking. You see this canyon of ice with mountains just piercing towards the sky in the background. Being a kid and seeing this was absolutely astonishing, but even as an adult, it's pure visual glory. This is also one of the most intensely vibrant tracks as well, even more so than Onuris. The mix of ultraviolet purples with this cyan blue just makes the track pop out. Even though I'm just going to be picking these two to mention, all of the tracks contain phenomenal uses of color, and they are all host to stellar designs. However, the other thing I want to talk about is the characters. The racers in this game ooze so much personality. All of them have a different vehicle and identity, and it adds so much flair to the gameplay. You're constantly hearing quips from them when you're racing. I feel like it strips away the empty feeling you get when you play with AI, because it makes you imagine playing against these esteemed racers. It also adds so much drama to the racing, which I feel like makes the gameplay so much more invigorating. Part of why people like to race in the first place is the feeling of competition, knowing you're competing with others to achieve this ultimate prize. Hearing the banter from the other racers as you throw their vehicle into the air is so exhilarating. There's also so much panache in the look of each racing car. And lastly, the portraits and artwork for each racer are so beautifully done. You really get to analyze the craftsmanship that went into the designs for all of these characters. The way they're posed and the type of costume they're wearing. The art just tells you so much about the character without having to provide a detailed description of them. You know, with all this talk about characters and their designs, I just remember the next game I planned on talking about.
You got boost power!
F-Zero GX. You know I had to save the best for last. I don't think it gets any crazier or 2000sier than this. F-Zero GX is the quintessential early 2000s future racing game. Playing this for the first time at my friend's house glued the imagery and gameplay of this game into my mind. This game really pushed the limits for graphical fidelity on the GameCube. Out of all the games I've covered, nothing comes close to the prestige that this game delivers. The style is probably the easiest thing to praise about this, and you can see why right from the title. You get a gist of what you're getting into. The game is all about the adrenaline factor and the thrill. A lot of the visual effects in the gameplay immediately convey that. Anytime you use your boost or fly over one of the speed strips, these bolts of lightning just explode around your vehicle and your energy meter. I feel like you just gotta say it's metal, because it's so metal. The timers are on overdrive with how fast you're moving, and I just really love how small the speedometer is in the UI, because the speed is already being portrayed through the whippiness of your vehicle. Another piece I really enjoy is just how synchronized your camera is with your vehicle. It evokes such an oddly satisfying sense. When you first start the race, your camera lifts in unison with your vehicle. It conveys the idea that you're behind the wheel when you're not. The FOV also increases anytime you drive over a speed strip or use your energy. Such small details that simply add such a beautiful weight to the game. Undoubtedly, nothing is as extraordinary as the environments. This game really emboldens the world around you. Every environment blends these themes together to make something new. What I appreciate more about these environments compared to those seen in Speed Racer though, is that they don't lose their techno-futuristic aesthetic. These metallic pieces are seen on every course you play on. Everything includes holograms or neon lights. Not all of the maps blend themes, however, and in my eyes, the ones that don't are the best. They absolutely run with the techno-futuristic design. My all-time favorite map is Lightning. This course is genuinely so damn cool. The course essentially takes place inside this perpetual lightning storm. The tracks are coated in this ambient orange, but the outside world is only lit by the electrical flashes of the storm. Every time it flashes, you see these towering structures ahead of you. There's a certain level of terror you feel being caught in this perpetual storm, but it's so alluring. Another one I wanted to mention is Big Blue, because it's a classic, but it's also a very important piece to me. The one major aspect I love so much about this course is water. You see, the one thing that always stands out to me when talking about early 2000s games is water graphics. There was something so serene and attractive about the water from that period. Maybe it was the cyan blue color of the water, since a lot of the games tended to use that color, but there is just something so charming about the visual presentation of it, and Big Blue is a good example. It's a really simple map, all things considered. Compared to Lightning, you're not being bombarded with so much creative depth. However, that's mainly why I like it so much. It's a far less bombastic and crazy map. It's just very tranquil. Additionally, I think a map like this benefits greatly from the setting of the game. The concept of a water planet being habitable but only through these skyscrapers is such an amazing idea. There are also moments where you're cutting through crevices and seeing these falls with buildings stationed next to them. You even go through wide, transparent tunnels to get to the other buildings. Obviously, this course could have been fleshed out a little more than this, but the concept is just so cool. All in all, the designs of every course are nothing short of eye candy. And for a game that came out in 2003, these environments still hold up tremendously. I could go on and on about this game, but for the sake of equality, I'm gonna stop myself here. We're at the finish line now, so it's time to wrap things up. Before I conclude this video, I have a couple of honorable aspects I want to talk about. These are related to the games I spoke about, however, I didn't know where to put them in this section without pulling away from the main focus. Regardless, during my research of Ridge Racer 5, I was going through a lot of old marketing and art of the game, and I must say it's absolutely amazing. Likely one of my favorite things to look at was the back cover of the game. The American version of the case is very encapsulating, but the Japanese version is the one I prefer. The layout and the typography are all just enthralling. It feels like an advertisement for a car more than the back cover of a video game. There's just so much prestige in the way that it presents the screenshots. It's really elegant. Modellista is sort of similar in its artwork. However, I enjoy this game's graphic design more than Ridge Racer's simply for the fact that it's very loaded with style. It's substantially more vibrant and eye-popping, and no, I'm not just saying that because it's cel-shaded. It's euphoric in the way that it makes you imagine the types of cars you can create and the world you can race in. Now, sadly, I don't have a whole lot to say about the Speed Racer artwork without just repeating myself, so I'll just say it's pretty great. F-Zero GX, on the other hand, almost had me wanting to say too much. I hate to keep praising this game, but I cannot stress just how eccentric and brilliant its graphic design is. The front cover is just so invigorating. There's just this tidal wave of energy and color. The back cover isn't nearly as striking in terms of presentation, but it oozes that early 2000s feel with the amount of texturing it uses. I know having cases as honorable mentions might be a little jarring, but I am a lover of physical media, okay? And I cannot leave out the artistry present in them. Anyways, when I initially set out to make this video, I only planned on talking about games adjacent to Ridge Racer. Realistic racing games, to be more specific. There was a lot to talk about in terms of how those games looked and the types of techniques they used to design and create their courses, as well as their graphics. However, the more I looked into the category of racing games in the early 2000s, the more I realized there was no way I could only talk about realistic racers. This era of racing games is wholly defined by innovation. So many different racing games trying to compete with each other to redefine the look and feel of a racing game, the setting and the world the game took place. While I do think a lot of the gameplay elements that some of these games introduced were left behind, the true lost art was the style these games carried. Visual presentation is everything when it comes to a racing game. The gameplay thrives on the style these games create. Some point down the road, that was forgotten. Like anything though, what is lost but remembered will always return. With that being said, this marks the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Asperish, racing off.